You were the one, my guiding light. Now I'm just walking in need. Well, the lights are shining bright tonight, honey, all shook up inside.
The sun was just beginning to rise over the small coastal town of San Isidro, painting the sky with colors that looked too soft to belong to a place filled with such struggle. Homes made of thin wood and rusted tin lined the narrow streets, each one carrying stories of families fighting quietly through their days. In one of those homes lived a young man named Liam Cruz, a boy whose voice carried more dreams than he ever dared to speak. Liam grew up learning what hardship meant before he learned how to spell his own name. His father had been a fisherman who never returned after a storm, leaving behind a silence that changed the family forever. His mother Alona, gentle but exhausted, tried to fill that silence with strength, but there were nights when even strength was not enough. Liam saw every tear she tried to hide, and with each one, something inside him promised to never let her carry the weight alone. Music became his answer to a life that offered him very little. He would sit outside their small home in the evenings, the salty wind brushing against his face as he practiced the same old Elvis songs from a borrowed speaker. There was something in that music, something warm, something familiar, that made him feel like he wasn't alone. And slowly, people in the neighborhood began to notice. The boy had a voice that could soften even the hardest day. Every weekend, Liam stood in the busy market, singing near the fruit stalls where the air smelled of mangoes and dust. Children would pause their games to listen, and tired workers would stop for a moment, letting his voice rest their weary minds. A few coins would drop into his small metal can, never enough to change their lives, but enough to keep hope from fading. He didn't dream of fame. He dreamed of helping his mother, repairing their old roof, buying medicine when she coughed too hard, and making sure his younger sister never felt the same fear he did growing up. His songs weren't performed for applause, they were performed for survival. On those warm Philippine nights, as Liam's voice echoed down the streets, no one knew that this quiet boy with a borrowed guitar would one day step onto a stage thousands of miles away. No one knew he was preparing for a destiny even he could not imagine. The turning point in Liam's life began on a day that felt no different from any other. The market was loud, the air was warm, and people moved through their routines with the same tired rhythm. Liam stood in his usual corner, his old guitar pressed against his chest, singing an Elvis classic the way he always did, soft at first, then full and rising, like a quiet sunrise gathering strength. Among the small crowd listening that day was a tourist from California. He wasn't looking for anything extraordinary, he was simply passing through, taking videos of everyday life in the Philippines. But when he heard Liam, he stopped walking. Something in the boy's voice, raw, sincere, filled with the weight of years he hadn't lived, pulled him closer. Without thinking, he recorded the performance, capturing the dusty light, the moving crowd, and the young Filipino who sang with the soul of an old legend. The video, posted online that night, didn't explode instantly. It grew slowly, passed from one person to another, shared in comments filled with surprise and admiration. Filipino communities abroad embraced it first, proud to see a piece of home shining so brightly. Then strangers from faraway places discovered it, touched by a voice that felt honest in a world full of noise. One morning, as Liam swept the small space outside his home, his mother walked toward him holding an old phone in her trembling hands. A message had arrived, an email they almost deleted, thinking it was a mistake. It came from America's Got Talent, inviting Liam to audition in the United States. The family sat together, staring at the screen, unsure if dreams like this were meant for people like them. Traveling felt impossible. Money was scarce. Even hope felt too fragile to hold. But neighbors collected donations, a local musician lent him a better guitar, and a distant relative offered him a place to stay in Los Angeles. With every act of kindness, the impossible felt a little more real. Liam packed lightly, just a few clothes, his guitar, and a small photograph of his father. Los Angeles felt like another world the moment Liam arrived. The lights were too bright, the streets too wide, and the faces too unfamiliar. Everything moved fast, as if the city had no time to breathe. Liam, carrying his guitar close to his chest, walked carefully through the AGT venue like a small boat navigating a storm. Every sound felt louder. Every heartbeat felt heavier. Backstage, contestants paced nervously, adjusting costumes, rehearsing dances, whispering final prayers. Liam stood quietly in a corner, trying to steady his breath. He was far from home, far from the places where people knew his name, far from the soft warmth of his mother's voice. Here, he was just another hopeful among many, a young Filipino boy with nothing but a dream that seemed too fragile for such a big stage. Yet something inside him refused to shrink. Maybe it was the memory of his father's rough hands guiding his tiny fingers over guitar strings. Maybe it was the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen on nights she tried to hide her fears. Or maybe it was the endless evenings singing in the market, where his voice was born not from ambition, but from survival. When his turn finally came, a quiet stillness settled around him. Walking out into the massive arena, Liam felt the weight of every step. The stage lights washed over him, almost blinding, revealing the thousands of faces watching. The judges sat before him like distant figures from a dream. For a moment, he wanted to disappear. But then he remembered why he came. He lifted his guitar gently, as if it were an extension of his own heart. And with the first note, something shifted. The trembling in his hands faded. The noise in his mind quieted. A warmth spread through his chest, the same warmth he felt singing under the Filipino night sky. His voice rose, deep, soulful, carrying the essence of a young man who had lived through storms and found peace in melody. The arena, once buzzing with energy, fell into a deep silence. His performance wasn't loud or grand, it was honest. Pure. A voice shaped by hardship, yet filled with tenderness. In that silence, everyone felt it, the arrival of a rare kind of magic. When the final note drifted into the air like a prayer, the moment hung still, as if the world itself had forgotten to breathe. Long after Liam stepped off the stage, the echo of his voice still lingered in the vast arena. People whispered about him in the hallways, their faces lit with the kind of wonder usually reserved for rare moments. But what touched them even more was not the sound of his singing, it was the story waiting behind it. Backstage, producers invited Liam to share his journey. He sat quietly, hands resting on his guitar, his thoughts drifting to the memories he carried from home. There was nothing glamorous about the life he described. No studios, no teachers, no opportunities. Just a small wooden house by the sea, where the nights were humid and the days were long. A house filled with love, struggle, and a music player that had survived storms just like his family. As cameras rolled, he spoke about growing up without a father, watching his mother sacrifice everything to keep their small family afloat. He recalled the evenings he sang in the market, not for fame, but to buy rice and medicine. Each word painted a picture of a young man shaped by hardship, yet softened by kindness. His story wasn't tragic, it was human. Honest. A mirror of the quiet battles countless families around the world faced every day. When the segment aired, millions of people watching AGT from their living rooms felt an unexpected connection. They saw a boy who wasn't chasing dreams for himself, but for the people he loved. They saw humility in his smile, courage in his journey, and something timeless in his voice. Social media lit up with messages from strangers who felt touched by his sincerity. Many said his story reminded them of their own childhoods, their own struggles, their own parents who had sacrificed everything. Fans began calling him the Filipino Elvis with the golden soul, not just for how he sounded, but for the warmth behind every note he sang. Liam's performance quickly spread beyond the show. Clips of him singing were shared across continents, played in classrooms, cafes, and family gatherings. He became more than a contestant, he became a symbol of hope, proof that talent was not limited by wealth or place of birth. And while the world celebrated him, Liam stayed grounded. He knew the attention was a blessing, but in his heart, he remained the same boy who once sang on crowded streets, hoping to make life a little easier for the people he loved. The night of the semi-finals arrived with a kind of electricity that Liam had never felt before. The arena was filled with thousands of people, but it was the quiet moments backstage that made his heartbeat strongest. He held his guitar gently, running his fingers over its worn edges. Every scratch carried a memory from home, market nights, crowded streets, warm sunsets, and the faces of people who believed in him long before the world knew his name. He had chosen a slower Elvis ballad for the performance, a song tied to his mother. She was the anchor of his life, the quiet strength behind every step he took. As he walked toward the stage, he pictured her sitting on their small sofa back home, eyes glued to the TV, hoping her son felt her love even from across an ocean. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the arena. And then, with a deep breath, Liam began. His voice floated gently at first, soft and trembling with emotion. It wasn't the confident sound of a superstar, it was the voice of a son singing for the woman who held his world together. Every note felt like a piece of his heart laid bare under the glow of the stage. As the song unfolded, the arena grew impossibly still, as if the entire world leaned in to listen. The judges sat frozen, their expressions softened by something deeper than admiration. The audience stared, many wiping tears without understanding why. It wasn't just the song, it was the sincerity, the truth, the quiet strength in his voice. Liam didn't sing to impress, he sang to feel. To remember. To honor. When he reached the final note, the last emotion-filled vibration drifted into the silence like a farewell carried by the wind. And then the arena erupted. The standing ovation rose like a wave, powerful, overwhelming, unstoppable. People cheered not only because he sang beautifully, but because he reminded them of the people they loved, the struggles they quietly endured, and the resilience that lived inside every ordinary human being. Clips of his performance spread around the world within hours. Millions watched, shared, and cried. Liam's name trended across continents, and messages flooded in from every corner, messages of pride, gratitude, and recognition. Whether he won the AGT trophy didn't matter anymore. He had achieved something much greater. He had touched hearts, lifted spirits, and brought hope to people who needed it. On that night, the boy who once sang in Filipino streets didn't just perform. He became a global voice of courage, love, and possibility. The stage lights glowed like stars waiting for a miracle. The audience murmured in amusement as a man in a glittery gold jacket walked toward the microphone. His name was Marco Dela Cruz, a 34-year-old factory worker from Manila, with dreams far too big for the small room he lived in. He wasn't famous, wasn't rich, and certainly didn't look like a celebrity. But deep within his eyes, there was something, an untold story wrapped in years of quiet pain and unshakable hope. When he softly said, "I'm Filipino Elvis," the crowd chuckled. Some smiled politely, others couldn't hide their laughter. They saw a man trying too hard to be someone else. But what they didn't see was the reason why he stood there that night, why this performance wasn't just about singing, but about redemption. Behind the curtain, two people watched him silently. Luz, his younger sister, barely in her 20s, clutched the silver cross necklace their late mother had given Marco. Her eyes were trembling with pride and fear. Next to her stood Rico, Marco's childhood friend and the guitarist who had spent months practicing with him in a dimly lit garage. Both knew that this was Marco's final shot, to prove not to the world, but to himself, that broken dreams could still shine. The judges leaned forward, half curious, half skeptical. The stage was quiet now, except for the hum of the spotlight. Marco closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, as if whispering to the heavens above. Somewhere inside, he wasn't just chasing applause, he was chasing the voice of a father who once said, "Music won't feed you." Would this be the night Marco's voice silenced all the laughter? Or would his lifelong dream end under the weight of mockery once again? In that fragile silence before the first note, the story of a man who refused to let the world define him was about to begin. And no one, not even Marco himself, knew just how deeply that voice would touch every soul in the room. Marco Dela Cruz lived a life that looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, it was filled with quiet wars no one could see. By day, he worked long shifts at a small factory in Quezon City, assembling electrical parts with aching hands and tired eyes. The rhythmic sound of machines was his constant companion, a reminder of how far his reality was from his dreams. Yet, every evening, when the factory whistle blew, Marco would walk home humming old Elvis Presley tunes, pretending for a few minutes that he was on a grand stage, not a crowded jeepney. Music had always been his escape. As a child, he'd listen to old vinyl records his father brought home from overseas. He would imitate Elvis's deep, velvet voice and mirror his dance moves in front of a broken mirror. People used to laugh, but Marco never stopped. To him, Elvis wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol of confidence, something Marco had never fully found in himself. After their parents passed away, Marco became the sole provider for his sister, Luz. He took up extra shifts, skipped meals, and often sang softly at night to help her sleep. Despite the exhaustion, there was always a spark in his eyes when he sang. It was the only time he felt truly alive. But life hadn't been kind. He had auditioned at small bars and local events, often ignored or told he was too old, too simple, or too different. Still, he carried his dream like a worn-out photograph, faded, but never thrown away. At home, his small apartment echoed with his routine. A cracked mug of coffee, a dusty guitar by the window, and an old mirror covered in sticky notes with song lyrics. Every morning, before heading to work, he would look into that mirror and whisper, "Maybe today." Marco wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing the feeling of being seen, of being heard. Underneath his calm, polite smile lived a man who had been laughed at too many times, yet refused to let those laughs define him. And now, on the world's biggest stage, he was ready to show who he truly was. There was a time when Marco believed that hard work alone could change his destiny. But dreams are fragile things, they can fade beneath the weight of responsibility and time. The turning point came 2 years ago, on the day he lost his mother. She had been his quiet supporter, the one who told him that his voice carried warmth like sunlight through rain. Her death left a silence that no song could fill. Since that day, Marco's music felt heavier, sadder. He tried to sing, but the words caught in his throat. Every note reminded him of the promise he couldn't keep, to make his mother proud before she closed her eyes for the last time. Nights became longer, and the world seemed smaller. He buried himself in factory shifts, hiding from the echo of his own unfulfilled dream. Luz often tried to cheer him up, but she could see how distant he had become. The man who once filled their small home with laughter now stared blankly at the flickering light bulb above their dinner table. The radio played softly, yet Marco rarely listened anymore. Even his guitar, his oldest companion, lay untouched, gathering dust in the corner. One evening, as rain poured over the tin roof, Marco came across a flyer online, "America's Got Talent auditions, open for all." For a moment, something stirred inside him. It wasn't confidence, but a quiet voice whispering what if. Yet, fear answered back louder. What if he failed? What if the world laughed again? The real struggle wasn't on the stage, it was inside him. Marco wasn't just fighting for a dream, he was fighting against the voice of doubt that had grown louder with every disappointment. The fear of being seen as a joke haunted him. But deep down, there was also guilt, the guilt of giving up too soon, of not believing in himself the way his mother once did. That night, with trembling hands, he picked up his guitar again. His voice cracked, his eyes watered, but something inside him awakened. And that was the night Marco decided, if he was going to fail, he would fail trying. The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains of Marco's small apartment, painting soft golden streaks on the cracked floor. It was the day after his 34th birthday, a day that felt like any other. The alarm buzzed, the kettle whistled, and the familiar exhaustion weighed on his shoulders. But something was different in the air that morning. A message blinked on his old phone screen, "Congratulations. You've been shortlisted for the AGT Manila pre-auditions." For a long moment, Marco just stared at the words, unable to breathe. He hadn't even realized Luz had sent in his video, secretly recording one of his late-night songs and submitting it online. She stood behind him now, smiling nervously. "You deserve this," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with hope. At first, Marco wanted to refuse. He wasn't ready, he told himself. He wasn't young, stylish, or confident like the others. But then, as he sat on the edge of his bed, he looked at the worn-out photo of his mother taped to the wall, her smile still calm and reassuring. It felt as though her eyes were telling him to go, to live once more through the music he had buried in fear. That small moment, just a message on a screen, became the spark that reignited everything inside him. He took a long breath and picked up his guitar, its strings slightly rusted from neglect. The first chord he strummed felt like coming home. His heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from the raw energy of possibility. From that day on, his world changed quietly. After work, he stayed up late practicing. His hands blistered, his voice cracked, but his spirit grew stronger. Rico joined him, bringing his old guitar and laughter back into Marco's nights. Luz recorded every rehearsal, cheering him through every mistake. It wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a promise. A promise to his mother, to Luz, and to himself. The moment Marco stepped onto that airport floor weeks later, ticket in hand, he realized something powerful: the world hadn't changed, but he had. For the first time, he was no longer afraid to be seen. The days leading up to the audition were far from easy. Marco quickly realized that chasing a dream demanded more than courage, it demanded sacrifice. His body was exhausted from double shifts at the factory, yet every night, he practiced until dawn. His voice often gave out midway, trembling under the weight of his own insecurities. There were moments he would stop singing altogether, staring blankly at the peeling paint on his wall, wondering if he was just fooling himself. The laughter of past failures echoed in his mind, the times when crowds mocked him, when bar owners dismissed him before he even sang. Those memories came back sharper than ever, whispering doubt into every note. But every time he felt like giving up, Luz's quiet encouragement reminded him why he started. She would leave small sticky notes on his mirror: "Keep going, Kuya. Mom would be proud." Slowly, Marco began to change, not just as a singer, but as a person. He learned to listen to his own voice without comparing it to anyone else's. He stopped trying to sound like Elvis and instead began to feel like himself. The more he practiced, the more his performances carried something deeper than imitation. They carried his life, his pain, his truth. Rico noticed it too. During rehearsals, he would pause and say, "You're not just singing anymore, brother, you're telling your story." And indeed, Marco's story began to pour out through every lyric, every breath. The once timid man was slowly transforming into someone who owned his voice, his journey, his scars. But with growth came pressure. The night before the big performance, Marco stood in front of his hotel mirror, staring at his reflection in the sparkling gold jacket. His heart raced with fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being laughed at once again. But this time, beneath all that fear, was something unbreakable, a quiet strength that came from surviving too much to turn back now. For the first time in years, Marco smiled at his reflection and whispered, "This time, I'll sing for me." The stage lights dimmed, and the crowd grew restless. Cameras focused on Marco as he walked onto the Grand America's Got Talent stage, his gold jacket shimmering under the spotlights like a quiet promise. The judges exchanged curious looks, and the audience chuckled softly when they heard him say, with a shy smile, "I'm Filipino Elvis." That laughter echoed in his chest for a split second, but this time, it didn't break him. It fueled him. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and the first note left his lips like a spark in the dark. The voice that followed wasn't an imitation. It was raw, soulful, trembling with truth. His tone carried years of pain and perseverance, like a man singing not for fame, but for redemption. Every lyric seemed to peel away the years of struggle. The audience, once amused, now sat motionless. The laughter faded. In its place came silence, the kind of silence that only appears when hearts listen. As the music swelled, Marco's voice rose higher, stronger. The spotlight caught the shimmer of tears in his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't a factory worker, or a man mocked for his dreams, he was an artist reclaiming his soul. His voice cracked on the final note, but it didn't matter. It was human. It was real. When the last chord faded, the silence broke into thunderous applause. The judges rose to their feet. Simon, eyes glistening, gave a rare smile. Luz and Rico cried backstage, their hands clasped tightly, knowing they had just witnessed something sacred. Marco bowed deeply, trembling with emotion. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not for who he pretended to be, but for who he truly was. As the golden confetti rained down, he looked up toward the ceiling lights that felt like stars, whispering a silent thank you, to his mother, to his sister, and to the boy he once was who never stopped dreaming. In that shimmering moment, the world no longer laughed. It listened.